You turn in your Bibles to Revelation chapter 19. I'm going to speak some more this morning about the second coming, and I'm also going to speak about the downfall of the Antichrist. Verse 15. Chapter 19 of the book of Revelation, verse 15. That's what we got to last time. And out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that as he would smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw an angel standing in the sun. Shows he's a supernatural being. How many people could do that? And he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great God, that we may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great. And I saw the beast, the Antichrist, and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, which would deceive them that received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into the lake of fire, Gehenna, burning with brimstone. And the remnants were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with his flesh. In the book of Revelation, it often tells us things that it's already told us previously in the Bible. But what it does is put them into a chronological sequence. In all the other books, they were never put into any sort of chronological sequence. And first of all, in verse 15, it tells you about him ruling with a rod of iron. Jesus is going to come back and rule over the earth for 1,000 years. And he's going to do it with a rod of iron. In other words, there's going to be lots of discipline. He's not going to stand for nonsense. Now this is also taught in the Old Testament. If you turn to Psalm chapter 2, Psalm chapter 2 is actually about the campaign of Armageddon. People don't realise that. Notice I don't call it the battle of Armageddon, that's a fallacy. The Bible never teaches there will be a battle at Armageddon. It's the gathering place. Talking about the Battle of Armageddon is like talking about the Battle of Dunkirk. There wasn't a battle at Dunkirk. It was where the Allied forces met together. The battle is actually going to take place in two places. Jerusalem and Bozrah in Edom, which is modern-day Petra in Jordan. Psalm 2, verses 8 and 9. Ask of me, and I shall give you the heathen for your inheritance. This is God the Father talking to Jesus the Son. And the uttermost parts of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, you shall dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now if you go on, Isaiah 11 verse 4 talks about the same thing. We won't look at that one, but we'll look at the one in Isaiah 63. And we'll read verses 3 to 6. This is Jesus coming into Bozrah. The second coming. I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none to help me. Jesus is going to come back with all the Christians in heaven at that time. He's also going to come back with all the angelic beings. But nobody's going to help him. He's going to do all the killing by himself. He's going to kill the Antichrist and all the armies of the Antichrist that come against Israel at the second coming. There was none to help me, for I did tread them in my anger and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled upon the garments, and I will stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance is in mine heart. The day of vengeance is the day that Jesus comes again. And the year of my recompense, my redeemed, is come. The redeemed here is Israel. And I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered there was none to uphold. Therefore mine own arm, the arm of the Lord in the book of Isaiah, is the Messiah, brought salvation unto me, and my fury it upheld me. And I will tread down the people in mine anger, and I will make them drunk with fury, and I will bring them down to the strength of the earth. Look at what it says in verse 1. Who is this that cometh out of Edom with dyed garments unto Bozrah? Bozrah is the place where the faithful believing remnant in the middle of the Great Tribulation flee to flee from Satan. It talks about this in chapter 12 of the book of Revelation. It also talks about it in Jeremiah 31. It tells you in both places they will flee to a wilderness. Bozrah is in a wilderness. It wasn't rediscovered till 1812. And it's an ideal place to hide out because it's got a very narrow passage into it that no more than 3 people can get down at the same time. It's very difficult to attack from aircraft because there's all rocks round about it. So the aircraft would likely crash into the rocks if they try an aerial attack. It's the ideal place for the Jews to hide in the second half of the Great Tribulation. In verse 16 he says he will be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You turn to Zechariah 14 verse 9. Once again, this is talking about the millennial kingdom. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. Jesus is one day going to come and reign as king for 1,000 years over the earth. In that day there shall be one Lord, and his name shall be one. You won't have people worshipping Allah in those sort of days. Jesus is the Messiah. The Messiah is the anointed one. 3 different types of people in the Old Testament were anointed: prophets, priests, and kings. According to the Old Testament, Jesus, at one stage or another, would take all 3 offices. Deuteronomy 18 teaches that God was going to raise up a prophet like unto Moses, a true prophet in other words, who would lead the people out of slavery into freedom. That's what Jesus does. One day he is going to be a prophet, and he is going to lead people out of slavery into freedom. According to John 4, in John 4 the woman at the well said, "Sir, I perceive you are a prophet." In Luke 24, the men on the road of Emmaus said that Jesus was a prophet. And in Acts 2, Peter said that Jesus was a prophet. When Jesus came at the first coming, he fulfilled the role of a prophet. The Bible also taught that he would fulfill the role of a high priest. Psalm 110, verse 1, talks about God the Father saying to God the Son that he was going to be a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was famous for being both a priest and a king. He was a high priest. Jesus went up into heaven and functioned as a high priest. He offered his blood up to God the Father. That's the function of a high priest. Only the high priest got to offer the blood once a year at Yom Kippur. Even the other priests couldn't do it. And he functions as a high priest according to the book of Hebrews. It says there that we have a high priest in heaven, one who's been touched with the sin of our infirmities, yet without sin. The Bible also teaches that he would function as a king. In Isaiah 32 verse 1 it calls him the righteous king. It's talking about him reigning at that time. In Psalm 72 it talks about him reigning as king, and it talks about how people will offer gifts to him. And it's talking about the millennial kingdom where people come up and offer gifts to him. There's other passages in the Bible that also talk about that. But I think the wise men of the East didn't realise that, and they offered gifts to him at his first coming. Where did they get that idea from? Probably Psalm 72. Here in this passage we're told once again he's going to function as a king. Okay, let's go to Isaiah 34 verses 6 and 7. The soul of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness and the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of the rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice. The word sacrifice then means a human sacrifice in Bozrah, and a slaughter in the land of Idumea, another name for Edom. And the unicorns, don't be fooled by that, because the word doesn't mean unicorns. shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their lambs shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with the fatness of heaven. Once again, we see that the Lord has got human sacrifice in Bozrah. He's going to kill all the armies of the Antichrist as they come against the Jews that are hiding out in there. Furthermore, the Bible teaches that the fowls of the earth will devour their flesh. Look at Ezekiel chapter 39. And Ezekiel has just been talking about a war that will happen where Russia, Persia, which is modern day Iran, and various other countries will come up against the nation of Israel. With what's been happening recently, we seem to be getting closer and closer to that event. I personally think that event will be the next event which will happen. I believe it will happen before the rapture. All the evidence suggests to me that it's the next event of great prophecy that will happen. I've always believed that for years, and I still believe it. And I don't think it's at all unlikely that we will live in that time. And I hope we do, because the Bible teaches that time that the whole world will know who is God. Everybody will realise that Allah is a false God. They'll all realise in that day that the God who saves Israel at that time will be the true God. So I hope that we do live in that day, because I think it will be one of the greatest times for evangelism the world has ever come to see. Look at it changes subject when it gets to chapter 39, verse 17. It starts talking about what will happen at the time of the second coming. And you, son of man, Ezekiel is the only person besides Jesus in the Bible to be called the Son of Man. Then say to the Lord God, speak unto every feathered fowl and to every beast of the field, assemble yourselves and come, gather yourselves on every side to my sacrifice I do sacrifice for you, even a great sacrifice upon the mountains of Israel, that you may eat flesh and drink blood. You shall eat the flesh of the mighty and drink the blood of the princes of the earth, of rams, of lambs, and of goats, of bullocks, all of them fattenings of Bashan. Bashan is the modern day Golan Heights. That's what's going to happen. There's going to be so many people who are killed that these animals, these birds, are going to eat them at that time. So we're all talking about the same thing. Now Revelation 19 verse 19 talks about them raging against Israel and against God. Psalm 2 verse 2. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. In the Bible, only two types of people have since been anointed in this sense. One is Jesus and the other is Israel. It's Israel they're taking issue against. They're coming up to attack and wipe out Israel. It's Satan's plan to completely kill every single Jew upon the earth. Next time I'll explain to you why that's his plan. There is a reason for it. It also talks about this in the book of Joel in chapter 3 verses 10 to 18. Revelation 19 verse 20, it talks about how the beast will be taken and will be given up to the burning flame. Once again, not the only passage that talks about this. Turn to the book of Daniel chapter 7. In the book of Daniel, the Antichrist is the little horn. Horns in the Bible, when they're used symbolically, they represent power. He's a little horn because he starts off with just a little bit of power. But eventually he dies and he comes back to life, and then he has satanic power. And he's able to do great things. Verse 11, and I beheld there, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. Tells you the same thing in the book of Revelation. He's a big head. He boasts a lot. And I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body was destroyed and given up to the burning flame. The burning flame is once again a reference to Gehenna. This raises a very interesting question. Is Gehenna the same place as hell? Most Christians in the world think it is. It's not. They're two separate places. First of all, look at Revelation 14 verses 9 to 11. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall be drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of all the holy angels and the presence of the Lamb, who in the book of Revelation is Jesus. And the smoke of their torment shall ascend for ever and ever, and they shall rest neither day nor night, those who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receive the mark of his name. Now we turn to Revelation 20 verse 13. Talking about exactly the same place. This is talking about a judgment that happens after the millennial kingdom. It's after the millennial kingdom the unbelievers are judged. Verse 13 it says, and the sea gave up her dead within it, and death and hell. Death is a reference to the physical body, hell is a reference to the spirit and the soul. Those are the three things that, according to the book of Thessalonians, make up a human being. Delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to his works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. If death and hell are cast into the lake of fire, how can hell be in the lake of fire? It's cast into it. In Luke 16, Jesus told a parable where he talked about a man being in great torment in Hades. Hades is the same place that the Jews call Sheol, it's the place of the dead. There are 4 compartments there. One's called the abyss. The abyss is a temporary place of confinement for demonic spirits. The demonic spirits in Luke's Gospel said to Jesus, don't cast us into the abyss. Satan himself, according to Revelation 20 verse 1, is going to be cast into the abyss for 1,000-year millennial kingdom, because he is the fallen angel. It's the same as the demonic spirits. The second place is a place called Tartarus. It's only mentioned once in the Bible, and most Bibles unfortunately substitute it with the word hell. So most people don't even know. That is a place of permanent confinement. They're going to be there until the great white throne judgment. And Jude talks about them in his epistle, and he says they are confined in everlasting chains until the day of judgment. That's the great white throne judgment that Revelation 20 is talking about. The third place is Abraham's bosom, which was a place of comfort that believers went to in the Old Testament. Eventually, when Jesus ascended into heaven, he took the souls and the spirits of those people up into heaven. Ephesians 4 talks about this, how he went down there and he got them out of there. Today, Old Testament saints, their souls and spirits are in heaven. The fourth place is this place in the Western world that we've come to call hell. The Jews never called it hell, they called it torments. We know that from the writings of Flavius Josephus. I actually asked Arnold Fruchtenbaum if he knew how the word hell got into the Bible, since it's neither Jewish nor Greek and was never in any early manuscripts. Even he admitted to me that he didn't know. No one on the internet seems to know. But I think I can take an intelligent guess at how it got there. The word hell is actually Teutonic in nature. The Teutons were a Germanic band. The Germans were split up into lots of different bands. They were famous for that. And the Teutons were one of those bands. So therefore, it's likely that it came from Germany. In 1518, a Dutchman called Erasmus decided to translate the Bible into Greek. So Martin Luther thought it would be a good thing to do the same. So in 1522, he translated it into German. And the Germans were very greatly influenced by Luther. That's why they eventually became anti-Semitic, because so did Luther. In 1526, Tyndale translated the Bible into English. He wasn't the first person to do so, but he's the first person to produce a huge amount of manuscripts. In 1454, a Swiss man called Gutenberg had actually produced the printing press. So by now they could print them. He was printing so many copies, but the Catholic Church kept trying to stop him doing it and kept trying to destroy all these. The Catholic Church, even the popes used to have mistresses. In about 1100, one pope was in bed with another man's wife, and he came home and caught him and murdered him. The pope got murdered because he was in bed with another man's wife. They were doing that all the time in the Catholic Church, and they didn't want people to know that the Bible condemned it. So they were trying to stop people from reading the Bible. They said that it was a sin for anybody except an official of the Roman Catholic Church to read the Bible. Tyndall said he wanted the boy in the field and the scullery maid to have a copy of the Bible. When they started getting copies, they stopped giving so much money to the Roman Catholic Church, because the Roman Catholic Church taught that you had to pay money to get into heaven. And people like Martin Luther said this is nonsense. The book of Romans teaches you're saved by faith through grace, and you're saved as a result of Jesus Christ. So that's what happened. And they said that we had the word hell in the Bible. Although it's not a biblical word, it is a biblical idea. The idea that there are places of torment are totally true. Now, if you go first of all into hell before you go into Gehenna, then presumably the Antichrist must also go into hell. Well, he does, but the book of Revelation doesn't mention that fact. The book of Isaiah does mention that fact. If you turn to Isaiah chapter 14, now we have two what are called little apocalypses in Isaiah, where you have sections where he just goes off and talks about the end times. One is in chapter 24 to chapter 27, the other is in chapter 11 to 14. And Jewish literature is very contrastive. Even Jesus keeps making contrasts. He compares the wise man who built his house upon the rock with the foolish man who built his house upon the sand. He compares the man who says, I will do my Father's will, but doesn't do it, with the man who says, I won't do it, and does it. In Luke 16, he compares the man who has it great in this life, the king, but has it terrible in the next life where he's in great torment, with the man who has it terrible in this life, is full of boils and things. Some people think he was a leper, with a man who is in great comfort. He does it all the time, and he does it in the books of the prophets, and it does it in Isaiah. And in chapters 11 to 14, it compares what would happen with Israel in the millennial kingdom, which will be a place of great joy, according to chapter 12, with what would happen to Babylon in the millennial kingdom and what would happen to their king. Babylon in the millennial kingdom won't exist as a place. It would just be a place where demonic spirits would dwell, and it would be a place of burning. Same is going to happen to Edom. You may say, why would places like that exist in the millennial kingdom? To show people that if they don't follow Jesus in the millennial kingdom, they're going to end up in a place like that. Two, you're not going to be taking any holidays for Iraq, which is Babylon, in the millennial kingdom. Nobody's going to want to go there. Want to go there now. Don't go, but you won't want to go there in the millennial kingdom. It'll be the last place on Tui's hit list. Verses 1 to 4. Isaiah 14. For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, another name for Israel, and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land. All the Jews are going to come back and live in Israel in the millennial kingdom. It's going to be divided into 12 sections according to Ezekiel 48, and the tribe are going to have each section. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place. Gentiles are going to help them to come back. And the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids. So some of them are going to serve the Israelites during the millennial kingdom. We're told about this in Isaiah 60, about how Gentiles come up into the land. But there are going to be Gentiles who will live in Israel in the millennial kingdom. According to Ezekiel chapter 47, when Jesus comes back, he's going to have a great judgment of who is saved at that time and who isn't saved. Matthew 25 talks about this judgment. The sheep and the goats, the sheep are the believers. They are going to live on and live in the millennial kingdom. But they will be in natural bodies like you and I are today. We'll come back and we will be in resurrected bodies. So it'll be a strange place to have people in resurrected bodies and people in natural bodies. They will then produce children. The book of Psalms calls them the children who are yet to be born. It refers to them like that 3 different times. And they are going to help the Israelites. Gentiles, wherever they live at that time in Israel, they will remain there, and whatever tribe that's given to, they will become part of that tribe. They will become nationalised Jews. That's what Ezekiel tells us about these things. If we go on to verse 5. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked and the sceptre of the rulers. He smote the people in wrath with a continuous stroke. He that ruled the nations, which was the Antichrist, in anger is persecuted, and no one stopped him. The whole earth is at rest, now at peace. Now Jesus has come again. And it's quiet. They break forth into singing. They're happy. Yet the fir trees rejoice at you, the cedars of Lebanon saying, since you have laid down and no fellow has come up against you. Sheol, it actually says there, from beneath is moved for thee to meet you at your coming. Now it's going to talk about how the Antichrist descends into Sheol, just after Jesus has killed him. He stirreth up the dead for you, even all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up the thrones of all the kings of the nations. It's going to be 7 of them by the end of the Great Tribulation. All they shall speak and say unto you, are ye become as weak as us? Are ye become like us? All the ungodly in Sheol are going to be amazed. Because in Revelation 13 they were saying things like, who can make war with the beast? He rose up from the dead. He's like Captain Scarlet. He's indestructible. If you ever watched Captain Scarlet. My 5-year-old brother used to watch it, and I was 18 at the time, and he insisted that he liked me to sit down and watch TV programmes with him, so I learnt all about Captain Scarlet. But the Antichrist is like that. He rises from the dead. How can you make war with somebody who, when he's killed, comes back to life? The pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of the vials. The worm is spread under thee, in other words, you're dead, and the worms cover you. Who can make war with the beast? Jesus. Jesus is going to make war with the beast, and he's going to kill him. Talks about this in 2 Thessalonians 2. At the brightness of your coming. When he comes again, the Shekinah glory light comes, and at the very time he comes again, the first person he kills is the Antichrist. It's good military strategy to take the best person out first. Then he goes on to talk about the person behind the Antichrist who also fell. How are you fallen from heaven? Now you might have the words, oh, Lucifer there. That is an incorrect translation that never came into the Bible till Jerome introduced the Vulgate, which I believe happened between about 391 and 405. The first real Roman pope was a man called Damasus, and he asked him to translate it into Latin. Damasus died in 382, but Jerome always remembers his promise that he'd made, and eventually in 391 he started to translate it into Latin, but he got it wrong. It should say, O day star, so Lucifer is a false name for Satan. Son of the morning, how are you cast down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For you said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. Who's going to ascend into heaven? Jesus. He's talking about the ascension. So in other words, he wants you to take the place of Jesus in the purposes of God the Father. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. When stars are used symbolically, they're used symbolically of angelic beings. You see this in Judges 5, verse 20. The stars in their courses fought against Sisera. Angelic beings fighting on behalf of Israel against the general who's come against them. You see it in Revelation 1. In Revelation 1 it says the 7 stars are the 7 angels of the 7 churches. You see it in Revelation 12 verses 3 and 4. It says that Satan drags down the stars and drags a third of them away. 1/3 of the angels got dragged away by Satan, his original thought. That's what it's talking about. I will sit in the congregation of the north. What's that talking about? That's talking about him becoming the millennial ruler. Jesus in the millennium is going to live in a place called Mount Zion. And right at the top of this mountain, it's a very unusual mountain. Jerusalem and Israel are going to be much, much bigger than what they are today. And he's going to sit at the top, and there's a plateau at that top of that mountain, 50 miles square. And the northern section is 20 by 50 alone. And the millennial compound is 1 mile square. And it's in the northern side of that mountain. And if you turn to Psalm 48, that's one of the passages that talk about this. Verse 1, great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth, is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. If you've got the word beautiful for situation there, more modern translations are using the word elevation, because it's elevated above all the mountains of the world. It's going to be the highest mountain in the millennial kingdom. Okay. So that's what it's talking about, the original thought of Satan. And there are many other passages that talk about this. Now if you go to Revelation 14 verse 13, and I heard a voice from heaven saying, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yes, saith the Spirit, and they that rest from their labours, their works do follow them. The rest that die at that time are the ones that don't take the mark of the beast. And they're all going to be blessed. Because the second they die, they're going to go to heaven. What does it teach in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 8? To be absent in the body, you leave your body behind when you die, and your spirit and your soul is to be present with the Lord. Believers, when they die, go straight away to heaven to be with the Lord. And at a later date, in the case of the church, at the date of the rapture, their bodies will join them. But their bodies are going to be changed. And we know from 1 Corinthians 15, they are not going to be bodies of blood and flesh. They're going to be something different. They're going to be incorruptible, is what 1 Corinthians 15 teaches. They won't be capable of aging. They will be capable of doing a great deal of things that we can't do at the moment. One of the prophecies in Isaiah talks about people flying, which suggests to me that one of the things we'll be able to do is fly. So I'm really pleased about it, because I've often dreamt about flying. When I wake up in the morning, I'm always really disappointed because I can't actually do it. So I shall be really pleased about that. Now, before I finish with the book with the Antichrist, I want to make a couple more points. If you turn to Revelation 13. Revelation 13, it tells you how the beast gets his power from the dragon. They worship the dragon, verse 4, which gave power unto the beast. The dragon is Satan. It tells you that in Revelation 20, that he's the dragon and the serpent. And he gives power to this beast. So he does these things by satanic power. Now over the years, I've come to the conclusion there aren't people demonly possessed, but demonly obsessed. Actually, there's no such term as demon possession. No Greek word ever means demon possession. It means to be controlled by a demonic spirit. Just as the Bible teaches there are people who are filled with the Holy Spirit, which means you're controlled by the Holy Spirit. That's what the Greek word means. People are controlled by Satan. That's what it means. Now this has led to a lot of people coming to all sorts of conclusions. I'm a Fruitland one did a conference at Great Malvern in 1998, which I went to, and there was this lady there who every question she asked seemed to include a demonic spirit in it. She suffered from demon obsession. I think in the end I got a bit fed up with her, because he said, not everything's about demons all the time. Don't make everything about demons, he said. People claim that in the book of Exodus, the magicians of Egypt did things by demonic power. They did not. I read a book by a guy called Dwayne Garrett, the most intensive Bible study book I've ever done on Exodus. 722 pages, 160 pages introduction, a very intensive book. He's a great expert on Hebrew, and he says the word means trickery. I've also heard people claim that David Copperfield uses demonic power in order to do his tricks. Complete and total nonsense. He uses trickery. He himself, if anybody ever calls him a magician, says, I'm not a magician, I'm an illusionist. He's regarded as the greatest illusionist in the world. Have you seen the illusion where a circus saw comes down and chops him in half? It's amazing. Wouldn't you expect loads of blood to be pouring out? He's watching it coming down and he's smiling. Everybody else would be screaming, "Get me out of here." He's chained to a table. "Get me out of here. I'm going to get chopped in half." He proceeds to be chopped in half. No blood comes out of his body at all. They then take the table in half. Half of him's over here, half of him's over there. It's pretty obvious it's not happening. Now, I don't know how that trick's done, but I do know how he makes aeroplanes disappear. They put something over the camera and you can still see the aeroplane in the distance. And then they take it away and suddenly the aeroplane's disappeared. And 35 people standing around saying, "That's amazing, it was there 1 minute and not the next." What did he do? Waved his magic wand and suddenly it disappeared? Maybe he's so strong that he carried it somewhere else. It's obvious that it's not really happening. What's really happening? Well, first of all, when they put something over the camera, they've actually put a picture of the aeroplane that's shaded in, so you think you can still see the aeroplane through what they put down. You can't, you've seen the picture. As the camera swings, the picture comes with it, and you still think the camera's staying still because the picture is still the same. When you're on a train, you know it's moving because you see the background start to change. You haven't seen the background change and it's remained the same. That's how they trick you. In reality, the aeroplane's still there, but the aeroplane's over there. The camera's now looking down here. If it's showing back there, you see the aeroplane. But 35 people said it just suddenly disappeared. Do you believe this? 35 people all told lies. Do you know why they told lies? Because they all got paid afterwards to say those right things. I want to end today by looking at two passages that people get wrong about the Antichrist. That's one of them. The other one is Daniel 11, verse 37. I heard Andy Woods recently say he knew that, I forgot his name, the president was after all the woman. What was his name? Bill Clinton. He wasn't the Antichrist because he had a great desire for women, and the Antichrist will not have a great desire for women. I'm amazed at how often people get things wrong about the Bible. They claim the Bible says an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. No, it doesn't. It says eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It was a Hebrew idiom that meant to show mercy and compassion towards people and not to judge them more strictly than they ought to be judged. That's what it originally meant. The Bible says pride. It says about the fool and his pride, doesn't it? It doesn't say that, right? You read Proverbs 16, verse 18. Pride doesn't go before a fool. Pride goes before destruction, haughty spirit before a fool. The lion will lie down with the lamb. I've even known very knowledgeable people on the Bible get that wrong. It actually says the wolf will feed or live with the lamb. It says it in two different passages actually. And it says that the lion will eat straw like an ox. They get this one wrong as well. A guy called Andy Woods, supposedly a great, very knowledgeable person on the Bible, but he got it wrong. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers nor the desire of woman. That's what it says, it's the desire of woman, not the desire for woman. Lyne Woods gives 4 different possibilities as to what this means in his Bible commentary. John Wolford gives another 3. They can't agree over what this means. It'd be amazing if the Antichrist was a homosexual, because it's just been talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, who is the biggest type in the Bible of the Antichrist. It's only just been talking about him in this passage. Antiochus Epiphanes was mad on women. He suffered from woman mania. He was exactly the opposite from a homosexual. He loved women. Furthermore, today they can't even agree about how to translate this verse. A Hebrew professor of the Hebrew language, biblical Hebrew, said there are 4 different possibilities as to how to translate this verse. And one of them is he, the Antichrist, is the desire of woman. And 2 different translations in America were on the verge of coming out And they were both going to use that translation because they believed that was the most accurate translation of the Hebrew. And I wouldn't be at all surprised that that turns out to be true. Gradually, as time goes on, archaeologists are finding out more and more about biblical Hebrew, and it makes them better and better interpreters of the Hebrew text. I want to end today by talking about how we learn. Now, we can learn so much about the end times. If we just learn it, it's just nothing more than head knowledge. In Romans 15, verse 4, it says that the scriptures are there for your learning. What can we learn from these things? We should always be seeking to learn and say, how does this apply to my life? Well, it applies to pride. We see the downfall here of the Antichrist. We see the downfall of Satan because of pride. In Philippians 2, you see the exact opposite. You see the exaltation of Jesus, and the main reason for the exaltation of Jesus was, there were two reasons. One was his humility in obeying God the Father, even when he didn't really want to die. He didn't want to go to the cross. He said, let this be taken from me. He didn't want God the Father to abandon him, forsake him for a certain period of time. That's what he really didn't want. He hated the thought of that more than crucifixion. And it says God has highly exalted him, and he's put him above everyone. One day all angelic beings, all people are going to worship Jesus. Even Satan is going to one day worship Jesus and bow down on our knees. Makes me wonder whether angels have got knees. All knees are going to bow down to him. Interesting question, isn't it? So that's what's going to happen at that particular time. The humiliation. Over the years, I've often found that a lot of problems in the church occur because of pride. I went to a church where they were going to do this for God, and they were going to make Aldershot a Christian town. Have you noticed how Christian Aldershot is? I mean, it's got one Hindu temple in it and two Buddhist places in it. This church ended up selling their church to the Buddhist. The latest I was told about them was that they were now meeting in the garage, and there was very few of them. There were hundreds of them, over 200 coming every Sunday. They started boasting. They got into American faith prosperity teaching and all sorts of wrong things. Got into the Toronto blessing. It's only then that people, the wackier they got, the more people joined them. Then the Toronto blessing happened, and for the first time people started to leave them. But you know, it's easy to recognise pride in other people. What about pride in ourselves? A while back, a certain person made a comment to me which wasn't particularly complimentary. That didn't bother me that much. When I was in the post office, I heard far worse things, and they didn't bother me. What bothered me was what a hypocrite the person was. They were worse at that particular thing than anybody else that I know. There'd been a world championship for it, they'd probably won it. What does Jesus say about hypocrisy? Only one type of judging in the Bible is ever condemned: hypocritical judging. Jesus condemned it in Matthew 7, verses 1 to 3, where he talked about people who have planks in their eyes. That was a rabbinic term for people who are worse than you. In Romans 2, verse 1, Paul said you shouldn't judge or criticise people when you're doing the same thing. This person was far worse than anybody I knew. When I pointed this out to this person, well, it was a woman, Cole, you could see the drop in her face. I thought any moment she's going to burst into tears. Very happy to say it about me, not at all happy for me to say it about her. When people behave like that, what do they tell you? One, how is it that they can see these things in other people but are so blind to see it in themselves? Two, how is it they don't mind criticising other people but they greatly mind other people criticising them? Do you know what that tells me? It tells me that they love themselves a lot more than they love other people. And yet Paul, James, and most importantly Jesus all said that one of the most important commandments was to love other people as much as yourself. If you loved other people as much as yourself, you would get no more hurt when people criticise you than you get when you criticise other people. Your reaction would be the same if you really loved other people as much as yourself. So it's our pride that makes us think that somehow we're a special case and we're beyond criticism. We're not. People also go into what's called super self-defensive mode. Somebody's criticising me, I must stand up for myself. Once again, a lot of that's just based in pride. That's exactly how the world behave. We should be better than the world. People criticise you, the first question you should ask yourself is there any truth to this criticism? And then you should say, is this constructive or destructive criticism? I've had people in the past criticise me, but their criticism has been constructive. And when I've actually thought about it, I've taken their advice and it's led to good things happening. Sometimes we need to have the humility to listen to people, even though they're not always telling us what we want to hear. Don't be so quick to defend yourself. And that's it for today.